What if everything Meghan Markle dreamed of in Hollywood, every red carpet fantasy, every A-list expectation, every whisper of stardom, collapsed in a single night on Jimmy Fallon's stage? What if the very industry she once counted on to validate her, to embrace her, to elevate her into a permanent spotlight, quietly rejected her in a way far harsher than anything the royal family ever did? And what if the humiliation you saw on camera was nothing compared to what happened backstage? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. These are not gentle questions. They're not comfortable questions. And they're certainly not questions Meghan Markle ever expected the world to be asking about her, especially not in 2025, after years of rebranding herself as a humanitarian, a producer, an advocate, a visionary, and now, once again, an actress attempting a triumphant Hollywood comeback. But here we are. Because behind the polished Instagram posts and carefully curated PR stories lies a chain reaction of events that spiraled far beyond her control, far beyond her team's ability to manage, and far beyond what Amazon MGM Studios ever signed up for. And it all began with a single, humiliating moment on The Tonight Show. Imagine Meghan sitting in her dressing room hours later, staring at the playback of her own interview, pausing, rewinding, watching Fallon's face as he delivered that now infamous line, listening to the audience reaction that wasn't supposed to sound like laughter, yet did, watching the exact second the smile on her face cracked, even though she tried so desperately to keep it together. And imagine being told, in that moment, that Hollywood insiders were replaying that clip too, not out of admiration, but out of morbid fascination. Because Fallon didn't just interview her. He exposed her, not intentionally, not maliciously, and not even in a way most people would immediately recognize. But subtle humiliation is often worse than obvious insult, isn't it? It sinks in slowly, creeping beneath the skin until it's impossible to ignore. It sits in the mind, replaying itself long after the cameras stop rolling. And for Meghan, who spent years shaping her public image with obsessive precision, that one moment detonated everything she had worked to rebuild. But let's rewind before the explosion. Because this story doesn't start on Fallon's stage. It starts months earlier, inside the high-rise conference rooms of Amazon MGM Studios, where executives tried, truly tried, to convince themselves that Meghan Markle was worth the investment. The comeback narrative, the she was misunderstood angle, the global curiosity factor. It all sounded perfect on paper, until the meeting started, and the emails circulated, and a few quiet voices raised concerns no one wanted to say out loud. What if she's not an asset? What if she's a risk? Hollywood hesitates quietly but rejects loudly, and Meghan never heard the whispers until it was far, far too late. Because behind the scenes, before any deal was finalized, before her team even pitched her new acting arc, Amazon MGM had already flagged her with a color code they reserve for high-maintenance talent. Not dangerous, not untouchable, but difficult, unpredictable, prone to controversy. A category that signals one thing above all: proceed with caution. So why did they hire her anyway? One word: hype. Meghan's comeback meant press, attention, conversation. It meant clicks, whether positive or negative. But the industry has a long memory. Directors don't forget difficult set histories. Producers don't forget budget overruns. Writers don't forget tension. And actors, well, actors talk. More than anyone realizes. Meghan thought Hollywood had been waiting for her return. Hollywood thought Meghan was testing their patience. These are two very different realities colliding in one explosive timeline. Now picture Jimmy Fallon's team preparing for the episode. The writers drafting jokes. The segment producers trying to balance being friendly with being entertaining. The booking staff navigating around Meghan's long list of appearance demands. And Jimmy himself, trying his best to remain neutral while quietly acknowledging to his team that this episode felt tense before anyone even stepped into the studio. And we haven't even reached the moment the world saw, the moment Meghan wishes she could erase from every corner of the internet. But before we get there, before the joke, before the look, before the audience's reaction and the millions of views, we need to sit in the simmering tension that led up to this night. Because tension doesn't explode without pressure. And the pressure on Meghan, professional, emotional, personal, had been building for months. Her Netflix production stalled. Her Spotify deal collapsed. Her brand partnerships cooled. Her Hollywood scripts gathered dust. Her public image fractured. And the calls from studios? They didn't come. Until one day, Amazon MGM reached out. A lifeline? Or a trap disguised as opportunity? That depends on who you ask. Because while Meghan believed she was being welcomed back to Hollywood with open arms, insiders describe the decision differently. They say she was a gamble. They say she was a PR experiment. They say she brought more chaos than clarity, more drama than development, more demands than deliverables. And every time Meghan walked into a meeting with executives, they reportedly scribbled notes. Not about her acting range, but about her control issues, her media sensitivities, her insistence on rewriting lines, her obsession with framing, her constant fear of being mocked. Fear is powerful, especially when you spend years telling the world you're above it. And yet, Meghan seemed terrified of being seen as anything less than elite. A-list, wanted, celebrated. But Hollywood doesn't bend to fear. Hollywood smells insecurity from a mile away. Hollywood circles it. Hollywood waits until it cracks. And on a cold studio evening under bright NBC lights, it cracked. Not because Jimmy Fallon intended to slice open the illusion, but because he accidentally lifted the curtain on the one thing Meghan couldn't control: public perception. The Tonight Show audience doesn't follow PR memos. They don't rehearse reactions. They don't read from a carefully curated script. Their laughter, whether intended or not, is real. And Meghan's reaction to that laughter was even more real. But let's look at the psychological backdrop for a moment. If your Hollywood comeback hinges on a single appearance, if your reputation as an actress is already on thin ice, if critics question your talent, if executives are worried you're not worth the budget, and if this interview is supposed to be the moment that relaunches your career, what happens when the moment goes wrong? What happens when it goes viral? What happens when industry insiders start sharing the clip, not through official channels, but through private group chats titled, "Oh no, she didn't. And here we go again"? Do you panic? Do you call your PR team? Do you blame Fallon? Do you blame the writers? Do you blame the audience? Do you blame the entire Hollywood system? Or do you spiral? Because according to multiple fictionalized insiders in this dramatization, Meghan did all of those things and more. They describe her backstage reaction as volcanic. They describe her phone calls to Amazon MGM as frantic. They describe her fury at Fallon as loud, emotional, and impossible to ignore. They describe her meltdown as the moment Amazon MGM finally realized this project was never going to be worth it. But before we reveal what happened backstage, before we expose the exact joke that sent Meghan into a rage, before we uncover how Fallon tried to salvage the moment, before we get into the Amazon MGM fallout, before we reveal the leaked internal ranking sheet labeling Meghan as a D-lister, before we uncover the studio meetings that spiraled into chaos, before we detail the Hollywood reactions that crushed her comeback dreams, we need to go back to the question that framed everything. Why was Meghan so desperate to return to Hollywood in the first place? Was it money? Was it status? Was it revenge? Was it identity? Or was it something deeper? Something more fragile. Something she didn't want the world to see. Something no amount of PR spin could hide. Because people don't fight this hard unless they're terrified of losing something enormous. And Meghan Markle? She was. Now as the lights dimmed at the Tonight Show studio and the applause faded, Meghan believed the interview was over. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that one small moment had already been clipped, shared, and sent to dozens of industry insiders before she even stepped off the stage. A moment that would define the rest of her Hollywood comeback. A moment that Amazon MGM executives watched in stunned silence. A moment Jimmy Fallon's team never expected to go viral. A moment Meghan thought she could suppress, but never could. And that moment is where everything began to unravel. Because the humiliation she felt on camera was only the beginning. The real devastation, the real betrayal, the real career-ending blow happened minutes later, backstage, where no cameras were supposed to be, where no microphones were supposed to pick up sound, where no witness was supposed to talk. But someone did. And what they revealed would ignite the biggest Hollywood backlash Meghan had faced since the day she left the royal family. What if the biggest secret behind Meghan Markle's Hollywood comeback was that it wasn't a bold career decision, but a frantic last resort? What if the move she sold to the world as a confident next chapter was, in reality, a desperate attempt to outrun a downward spiral happening behind closed doors? And what if the very studios she hoped would rescue her, Netflix, Amazon MGM, even the mid-tier talent agencies she once thought beneath her, had already quietly decided they didn't want her back? Those are uncomfortable questions, but the industry had been asking them for months before Meghan ever stepped back into a studio lot. And as much as Meghan wanted to frame her return to acting as a triumph, insiders describe it differently. They say it felt hurried, forced, out of alignment with her own public persona, like she was trying to run a race with her shoelaces tied together. And they say that by the time she showed up on Jimmy Fallon's stage, the comeback had already begun to unravel. To understand why, we need to go back to the year before her Amazon MGM deal. A year marked by financial pressure, PR failures, public skepticism, and a growing sense that Meghan's influence, once her most powerful asset, was fading faster than she realized. A year when Meghan began noticing a pattern she couldn't ignore: doors that once swung open now stayed shut. Emails that once received immediate replies now took days. Opportunities that once felt guaranteed now vanished quietly, without explanation. And behind all of this, a truth Meghan didn't want to face. Hollywood had moved on without her. At first, Meghan brushed it off. She blamed bad timing, the volatility of the industry, the chaos of streaming platforms, shrinking budgets, and cutting shows. But she couldn't ignore the shift forever. Not when Netflix started reducing her production slate. Not when Spotify publicly cut ties. Not when her team struggled to secure major brand partnerships beyond a few safe lifestyle deals. Not when the press began framing her as overexposed instead of in demand. And not when William Morris Endeavor, the agency she entered with so much fanfare, quietly lowered her internal priority ranking. That was the moment insiders say everything changed. Because Meghan didn't just want relevance. She needed it. Her entire brand depended on being perceived as important, influential, sought after. The global spotlight wasn't just an accessory to her identity, it was the foundation of it. And when that foundation started shaking, Meghan did what she always does when she feels control slipping through her fingers. She pivoted. But this time, the pivot felt different. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't visionary. It wasn't even planned. It was reactive, emotional, rooted in fear, frustration, and a mounting sense that she was watching her public value shrink in real time. So one day, according to this fictionalized dramatization, Meghan made a declaration to her team. I want to return to acting. Not cautiously, not tentatively, but with a tone that suggested this wasn't an idea, it was a mandate, a decision, a directive that everyone around her was expected to support unquestioningly. Except they didn't. Not at first. Some team members reportedly exchanged uneasy looks. Others asked careful questions. Was this really the right move? Would Hollywood accept her? Would audiences take her seriously? Would her acting abilities, largely untested since Suits, stand up to modern expectations? And most importantly, was she prepared for the scrutiny that came with this kind of comeback? Meghan didn't want to hear doubts. She wanted solutions. And she wanted them immediately. Her publicists drafted new talent-forward branding. Her agents began calling studio executives, some of whom politely returned calls only because of her name recognition, not because they had genuine interest. Her strategist compiled a list of roles Meghan might be right for. But the reality was unavoidable. Studios weren't calling her. Her team was calling studios. This imbalance mattered. A-listers don't chase roles. Roles chase them. But Meghan was now in the opposite position, whether she admitted it or not. And then came the sting. Multiple studios passed on her before she even reached audition stage. Not because she wasn't talented. Not because her image was controversial. Not because they disliked her personally. But because she was too high risk for the budget. That's the phrase one executive used, according to insiders. Too high risk. And in Hollywood, those three words are poison. Imagine Meghan hearing that. Imagine the internal blow. Imagine the panic quietly blooming beneath the exterior of confidence. For someone whose identity was deeply tied to being seen, wanted, valued, rejection wasn't just disappointing. It was destabilizing. So when Amazon MGM finally showed interest, Meghan clung to it with the intensity of someone who knew this might be her last best chance to prove she was still relevant in an industry that had begun to forget her. But Amazon MGM's interest wasn't as pure as it seemed. Insiders say the initial pitch wasn't even for a major project. It was for something modest, something low stakes, something that could be built up later, but only if Meghan performed well. But Meghan didn't want modest. She didn't want low stakes. She didn't want to work her way up again. She wanted the triumphant re-entry, the hero's narrative, the comeback queen moment. And she insisted the studio treat her that way. This insistence created friction almost immediately. Amazon MGM executives raised concerns about budget expectations. Meghan raised concerns about script quality. They wanted a collaborative process. She wanted creative control. They wanted manageable press. She wanted a global event. Contradictions everywhere. Every meeting, every email, every negotiation seemed to twist into another tug-of-war between expectations and reality. Yet despite the tension, the deal moved forward. Not because the studio believed Meghan was their next big star, but because they believed she was a valuable experiment, a name with built-in attention, a figure who generated headlines even when doing nothing. And in a streaming world battling for visibility, attention, any attention, was currency. But Hollywood attention is fragile, and Meghan's attention was controversial. And controversial attention comes with a cost. As Meghan prepared for her first major promotional moment, The Tonight Show appearance, her team framed it as the beginning of her ascent back to the top. A fresh chapter, a chance to show Hollywood she was not a relic of a royal scandal, but a genuine talent worthy of investment. But deep down, Meghan knew the truth. This wasn't a fresh chapter. It was a test from Amazon MGM, a test from her agency, a test from Hollywood, a test from the audience. And she had to pass, because if she didn't, there might not be a second chance. That pressure didn't show publicly. Not at first, but behind the scenes, it colored every conversation Meghan had with her team. She demanded perfection. She micromanaged wardrobe choices. She revised talking points. She rehearsed answers repeatedly, insisting on controlling the storyline. She couldn't afford mistakes. She couldn't afford missteps. She couldn't afford another PR storm. But ironically, the more Meghan tried to control the narrative, the less natural she became. The more tightly she gripped the image she wanted to project, the more forced her performance appeared. And Hollywood is deeply attuned to forced performances. Every producer, every agent, every executive who watched her prep materials felt the tension bleeding through. It wasn't confidence. It was fear masquerading as control. And fear is the smell Hollywood responds to most viscerally. And so, as The Tonight Show appearance approached, insiders say Amazon MGM decided to observe her performance as not just a promotional moment, but as an audition. They wanted to see if Meghan could carry a room, if she could charm an audience, if she could deliver comedic timing, if she could recover from awkward exchanges, if she could be relatable, if she could be likable. Because in Hollywood, you don't need to be loved, but you do need to be wanted. And this was Meghan's chance to prove she was. But here's the twist. Meghan didn't know the studio was using the Fallon appearance as a test. She thought she was already approved, already supported, already embraced as a star returning to her rightful place. The truth was harsher, and that truth was waiting for her on Jimmy Fallon's stage. Because while Meghan walked into the studio believing this interview would mark the beginning of her great comeback, Hollywood walked into the studio believing it was the moment they'd learn, once and for all, whether she was worth investing in. And the answer they got wasn't the one Meghan expected. The moment that would expose everything was coming. But what came right before it would change the trajectory of her Hollywood comeback in a way no one, especially Meghan, saw coming. What if Meghan Markle was the last person in the room to realize she wasn't the star Amazon MGM Studios thought they were getting, but the liability they feared they were inheriting? What if the studio that publicly praised her talent, her charisma, and her global brand power was privately whispering about the exact opposite behind boardroom doors? And what if the truth that Meghan desperately needed to avoid, that Hollywood didn't see her as a rising star, but as a declining asset, was already circulating through internal emails long before she sat down on Jimmy Fallon's stage, in the rooms Meghan never walked into? The rooms where executives made their real opinions known. The rooms where careers are shaped, where decisions are whispered, where reputations are ranked in cold, merciless categories. Rooms Meghan believed she had already won over. Rooms she didn't know had concerns, doubts, and red flags attached to her name before she even booked her first flight to Los Angeles for the project meetings. Because while Meghan viewed the Amazon MGM deal as her triumphant Hollywood reentry, the studio saw it differently. They saw it as a gamble, a calculated risk, a potentially explosive PR experiment that could bring massive attention or massive fallout. And as much as they tried to remain open-minded, there were several moments in those early stages when insiders say the entire executive team questioned whether Meghan was truly worth the investment. Let's step into the first of those meetings. A glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor, overlooking Los Angeles. On the table, a thick presentation deck outlining Meghan's proposed acting return, promotional strategy, and the projected global impact her participation would allegedly generate. Her agent had prepared a glossy, optimistic pitch, charts, analytics, demographic breakdowns, audience sentiment curves, all designed to sell the idea that Meghan Markle could still move the needle. But numbers don't lie. And the numbers didn't inspire confidence. One executive pointed to declining public interest metrics tied to Meghan's name. Another highlighted the negative sentiment spikes following her recent public appearances. A third raised concerns about her acting track record, solid but not exceptional, consistent but not transformative, limited but serviceable during the early 2000s cable era. The room fell quiet. Too quiet. Then someone asked the question no one wanted to voice. Are we hiring her for her talent or for her controversy? And that question split the room instantly. Some believed Meghan still held global appeal, if not admiration, then certainly fascination. That alone could drive views, clicks, press cycles, interviews, media buzz. They argued that even polarized figures could be profitable. In fact, sometimes even more so. Others disagreed sharply. Controversy attracts attention, yes. But it also attracts scrutiny, backlash, PR nightmares, and unpredictable public behavior. Meghan brought all of that in abundance. One executive finally said it plainly. She's not a safe bet. That phrase echoed through the room like a warning shot. A safe bet is an actor who delivers on time, on budget, and with minimal drama. A safe bet is predictable, steady, cooperative. Meghan, according to the executives who had followed her post-royal career, was none of those things. Her interviews sparked international headlines. Her public statements were often polarizing. Her legal battles created friction. Her PR strategy felt chaotic. Her brand, while globally recognizable, was equally globally divisive. Still, Amazon MGM didn't want to dismiss her entirely. They knew attention equaled money. They knew her name would bring eyes. They knew headlines would follow. They knew she could make an average project go viral. So they continued the conversation. But doubts lingered like smoke hanging in the air. Then came the memo. A confidential internal risk assessment, circulated through the studio's upper ranks. A document that later became one of the most whispered about items in Meghan's entire comeback narrative. It had a section titled Talent Tiering and Assessment. Inside that section, color-coded rankings. Green for reliable, yellow for cautious but manageable, red for high-risk talent who require heavy monitoring. Meghan wasn't in the green. She wasn't in the yellow either. She was highlighted in orange, a color reserved for what studios call unpredictable variables. Not a hard no, not a definite yes, but a talent who required extraordinary care, negotiation, and supervision to keep projects on track. The section describing her included fictionalized lines like, history of sudden PR shifts, uncontrolled narratives in press cycles, public unpredictability with interviews, high external scrutiny from global media, and the line that stung the most, potential for brand overshadowing project. That was the core fear, that Meghan's name would become bigger than the work itself, that the drama would eclipse the art, that the attention would overwhelm the movie, the show, the campaign, whatever Amazon MGM was trying to build. But here's the twist. Meghan believed she was the project. She believed her name elevated anything she touched. That she was the selling point, the draw, the marquee headline. And to some degree, She wasn't wrong. Her involvement did bring attention. But Amazon MGM didn't want a headline generator. They wanted stability. And the contradiction between Meghan's self-perception and the studio's internal concerns widened with every meeting, especially when Meghan began making demands. Big demands. More creative control. Approval over storylines. Approval over promotional materials. Approval over casting choices. Approval over messaging. To her, these were normal expectations, A-list expectations. But to Amazon MGM, these weren't the requests of a rising star. They were the demands of someone trying too hard to appear powerful, trying too hard to cling to relevance, trying too hard to mold her comeback into a perfect narrative rather than allowing it to grow organically. And the more demands she made, the more executives scribbled silent notes into their private folders. But one meeting in particular changed things. It lasted only 19 minutes. Meghan had dialed in via video call. She looked confident, composed, prepared, but her tone quickly shifted from collaborative to controlling. She shot down multiple creative ideas. She insisted on rewriting sections of dialogue. She objected to a proposed schedule change. She challenged the studio's marketing approach. She interrupted. She corrected. She debated. She dominated. And then she made her biggest misstep. She referenced a headline about herself, one portraying her as powerful, unstoppable, influential, and she used it to justify why she should have final approval on multiple production decisions. Executives exchanged glances. That was the moment, insiders say informally, when Amazon MGM realized they had underestimated the scale of the challenge. Not because Meghan lacked talent, but because she lacked awareness. Hollywood respects confidence, but it rejects delusion. And in that meeting, executives saw a version of Meghan who believed her influence was far greater than their analytics suggested. Still, they continued forward. They needed to test her with something public-facing before making final decisions. And Jimmy Fallon's show was the perfect testing ground. Unscripted, unpredictable, audience-driven, unfiltered through PR spin. A pure examination of whether Meghan could charm or repel, survive or stumble, rise or fall. But before Meghan even set foot on the Fallon set, one final moment inside Amazon MGM sealed her internal fate. A senior executive stood up during a strategy meeting and delivered a single sentence that made everyone in the room stop breathing. Guys, we need to seriously consider whether Meghan is actually a D-lister with A-list expectations. Silence. Then murmurs. Then uneasy nods. The phrase stuck. It circulated quietly. It became shorthand. It became an internal benchmark. Not all executives agreed, but enough of them did. And Meghan had no idea. She walked into the Tonight Show studio believing she was there to solidify her position as Hollywood royalty. In reality, she was walking into the room where Hollywood would decide whether she even belonged on the list at all. And Jimmy Fallon, unknowingly, was about to deliver the moment Amazon MGM needed to make their final judgment. The moment that would either justify the risk or prove they were right to be afraid. What if the biggest shock of Meghan's Tonight Show appearance wasn't what happened on stage, but the fact that her booking almost didn't happen at all? What if, behind the scenes, Jimmy Fallon's producers were whispering concerns, debating risks, and quietly contemplating whether bringing Meghan into the studio was worth the chaos they suspected was coming? And what if the real story, the story Meghan never wanted to admit, was that she wasn't the prize guest her team presented her to be, but a scheduling headache wrapped in a PR gamble? This chapter begins long before Meghan stepped into the brightly lit green room, long before she sat across from Fallon under those world-famous studio lights. It begins with a phone call, one that insiders say kicked off a ripple of tension throughout the Tonight Show's booking department. A call from Meghan's representatives offering her availability for a promotional appearance tied to her Amazon MGM project. Under normal circumstances, a high-profile figure, royal or Hollywood, would be a guaranteed yes. Publicity gold, ratings fuel, a safe bet. But Meghan wasn't considered safe anymore. And the moment her name was brought up, a strange silence settled over the booking room. Producers exchanged glances. Some sighed, others raised eyebrows. A few muttered things like, "Oh boy," under their breath. Because Meghan wasn't just another celebrity. She wasn't even just another controversial figure. She was a walking PR minefield. a guest whose presence meant navigating an obstacle course of sensitivities, demands, restrictions, and unpredictable reactions. One producer, fictionally dramatized here, finally said what everyone was thinking. Do we really want to deal with this? That wasn't disrespect. It was fear. Fear of miscommunication. Fear of headlines. Fear of her team micromanaging the entire script. Fear of her reaction to even mildly playful jokes. Because The Tonight Show isn't a serious political interview. It isn't a documentary. It isn't a rigid, scripted monologue. It's comedy. It's banter. It's unpredictable. Jimmy Fallon thrives on spontaneity, on irony, on self-deprecating humor, on light jabs delivered with charm. But Meghan? Meghan wasn't known for handling spontaneity well. She wasn't known for humor. She wasn't known for embracing irony. She wasn't known for taking jokes in stride. And Meghan's public image, carefully constructed, heavily curated, did not align with Fallon's rapid-fire, anything-can-happen style. So the internal debate began. Some producers argued that Meghan's presence would bring huge viewership numbers, that the internet would explode, that people, whether they loved her or hated her, would tune in. Others argued that the risk wasn't worth it. That one wrong line, one laugh, one awkward moment, one accidental gesture, could unleash an avalanche of backlash. And then came the biggest concern, Fallon's comedic instincts. Jimmy Fallon is not cruel, but he is impulsive. He jokes quickly. He stumbles into humor without fully calculating how it will land. And Meghan's team was notorious for scrutinizing even the smallest comment. That meant Fallon would have to walk on eggshells, rehearse his jokes excessively, get lines pre-approved, avoid anything that might trigger a media firestorm. That wasn't Fallon's style. It wasn't his strength. It wasn't his show. But then came the deciding factor. NBC executives, always hungry for ratings, reminded The Tonight Show team that Meghan brought massive online engagement. Whether positive or negative, it didn't matter. What mattered was the algorithm, the buzz, the trending topics, the clips that would circulate for days, the media coverage that would follow. One exec reportedly said, "Love her or hate her, she moves numbers." And that was true. Meghan could fill a room with supporters or critics, but she could fill it. And in the cutthroat world of late-night television, filling the room mattered. So reluctantly, cautiously, nervously, the show said yes. But it wasn't a confident yes. It was a "we'll try, but God help us if this goes sideways" yes. And from the moment that booking was confirmed, tension flooded the Tonight Show offices. A writer complained, "We'll have to rewrite everything 3 times." A researcher whispered, "She'll flip if he mentions anything royal." A producer warned, "Don't even joke about acting unless she approves it." Because Meghan's team sent a detailed, sprawling list of guidelines, do's and don'ts, preferred topics, forbidden references. It read like a legal contract, and some parts were downright baffling. One guideline warned against mentioning certain former castmates from Suits. Another requested Meghan not be framed as returning to acting, but evolving. Another insisted she not be introduced as the Duchess, but also not as just Meghan Markle. Another demanded no jokes about titles, royal life, or past family associations. Another said Fallon should avoid oversimplifying her new Hollywood trajectory. Oversimplifying. On a comedy show. With Jimmy Fallon. Producers exchanged looks of horror. Fallon himself wasn't thrilled either. He asked his team, half joking, half dreading, "Are we sure she even knows what show this is?" Fallon thrives on spontaneity. Meghan thrives on control. The combination was combustible from the start. But the Tonight Show team, trying to maintain professionalism, pressed on. They revised monologue notes. They softened jokes. They drafted safe questions. They cleared lines with Meghan's representatives. They edited, re-edit, and then re-edit again. Still, something didn't feel right. Writers began whispering amongst themselves. "This is going to blow up. She's going to hate something. We're walking into a no-win situation." But they prepared anyway. And then came the rehearsal. Fallon stood on the stage, reading through the cue cards. He glanced at the introduction prepared for Meghan. He frowned. It was flat, lifeless, stripped of personality, completely void of humor. Written with so many restrictions that it barely resembled a Tonight Show introduction at all. Fallon shook his head. "This doesn't sound like me," he said quietly. Because that was the truth. The introduction felt like a hostage negotiation. The questions felt sanitized. The jokes felt missing. The energy felt wrong. But then, the twist. One writer, tired of the constant back and forth with Meghan's team, slipped in a line. A harmless line. A playful line. A line Fallon delivered hundreds of times to dozens of celebrities without issue. A line that gently teased Meghan's Hollywood break in the 2010s. Not cruel, not mocking, not insulting, just a light jab. A comedic line, perfectly normal for Fallon. And that line would become the spark Meghan later exploded over. But no one knew it yet. Not the writer, not the producer, not even Fallon. They thought they were doing their jobs. They thought the joke was safe. They thought Meghan, someone returning to acting, would laugh along, as countless actors had before. Except Meghan's team hadn't approved that line. And backstage, hours before the show, Meghan saw it. But before we get to her reaction, we need to stay inside Fallon's world for a moment. Because while Meghan's team was panicking over a cue card, Fallon was facing a different dilemma entirely. He didn't know which Meghan he was going to get. Would she be warm? Would she be cold? Would she be defensive? Would she be charming? Would she be tense? Fallon had no idea. And for a host who survives on energy, that was terrifying. Guests who are unpredictable can derail entire segments. And Meghan, in the eyes of Fallon's team, was the definition of unpredictable. Minutes before Meghan arrived, the staff held a quiet emergency huddle. They revised lines again. They tried to eliminate risks. They attempted to prep Fallon for worst-case scenarios. But the truth? There was no preparing for Meghan Markle. Not fully. Not realistically. Not with her nerves high and her comeback on the line. And then Meghan arrived. That's when it began. The stiffness, the tension, the overly rehearsed tone. Staff expected nerves. What they didn't expect was Meghan taking immediate issue with nearly everything she saw. The lighting, the seating arrangement, the phrasing on cue cards, the camera angles, the transitions. Fallon's crew later described her energy. Again, in this fictional dramatization, as tight, edgy, braced. Like someone walking into a room expecting an attack. But the most important moment came when Meghan's eyes landed on the line. The line the writer slipped in. The line that Fallon rehearsed casually. The line that would later detonate the entire interview. She froze. Her face hardened. Her breathing changed. One staffer whispered later. That was the moment we knew something was wrong. But what Fallon didn't know, what Meghan didn't say, was that she interpreted that one harmless line as an insult. A threat. A humiliation waiting to happen on national television. She decided, in that moment, that Fallon might be setting her up. And once Meghan believes she's being attacked, there is no calming her down. For Meghan, that line wasn't a joke. It was a warning. A warning that The Tonight Show might embarrass her. A warning that Hollywood wasn't treating her like royalty. A warning that this interview could define her comeback in the worst possible way. And Fallon? He walked into the segment completely unaware that the room behind him had already shifted. He had no idea that Meghan's mood had tightened. He had no idea she was offended. He had no idea she was preparing to defend herself. He had no idea he was about to step into one of the most awkward interviews of his career. Because what happened next wasn't just an interview gone wrong. It was the first spark in a firestorm that would engulf Meghan, Jimmy Fallon, Amazon MGM, and the entire Hollywood narrative she desperately wanted to control. And the moment that irreversibly set that fire happened seconds before the cameras rolled. What if Meghan Markle's worst nightmare didn't happen on the Tonight Show stage, under bright lights, in front of millions, but backstage, in the shadows where secrets are supposed to stay hidden? What if the humiliation that eventually went viral was merely the public tip of an iceberg, while the true disaster, raw, unfiltered, unedited, exploded behind a closed dressing room door minutes before Jimmy Fallon walked out to greet the audience? And what if that unseen moment, that private unraveling, was the exact turning point Amazon MGM executives had feared from the beginning? The one that confirmed every quiet concern they'd whispered about partnering with her. This chapter begins with tension so thick it felt visible. Because the moment Meghan arrived backstage, the air shifted. The hustle of stagehands, the chatter of crew members, the last-minute run-throughs of jokes, all of it paused in a strange, artificial silence. Meghan walked in not like a guest preparing for a fun late-night appearance, but like a dignitary bracing herself for battle. Shoulders stiff, smile tight, eyes scanning the room as if hunting for danger. She wasn't excited. She wasn't relaxed. She wasn't present. She was bracing. And bracing Meghan was the version everyone feared. One staff member, in this fictionalized dramatization, later described her entrance in 6 words. It felt like she walked in angry. But no one understood why. Not yet. Because the Tonight Show crew, accustomed to chaotic personalities, diva demands, unpredictable celebrities, expected nerves. What they didn't expect was the energy Meghan brought with her. An energy that said, "I'm not here for jokes. I'm not here to play. I'm not here to be surprised." Which, of course, was a problem. Because The Tonight Show thrives on surprises, on spontaneity, on moments that feel unplanned, on humor that catches guests off guard. That's the magic of Jimmy Fallon. But Meghan's magic? Meghan's persona? Meghan's control-driven brand? They ran in the opposite direction. Still, the crew did everything possible to keep her comfortable. They ushered her to her dressing room. They offered refreshments. They introduced makeup artists, stylists, lighting coordinators. They tried to match her energy, soothe the tension, soften the edges. But Meghan's smile remained brittle, tight, controlled, almost forced. Because in her mind, the threat was already detected. And that threat was the cue cards. It happened fast. A stage manager handed Meghan the updated card list. A standard practice for celebrity guests. She skimmed the list, nodding absently, until she reached the card. The line Jimmy Fallon planned to deliver in the introduction. Her face froze. Her breathing hitched. Her shoulders stiffened sharply. But the room didn't react, because at first glance, the line seemed harmless. To everyone except Meghan. The line referenced her earlier acting career, her time on Suits, a playful nudge at her pre-royal Hollywood life. Fallon had used similar lines on countless guests, celebs who loved being teased, who laughed at their past roles, who embraced the nostalgia. But Meghan didn't see nostalgia. She saw insult. She saw minimization. She saw a threat to the carefully constructed narrative she had been building for months, if not years. A narrative that placed her transformation as a bold, strategic evolution, not as a former cable actress returning out of necessity. So she snapped. Not outwardly, not immediately, but internally, fiercely. And when Meghan snaps internally, her exterior becomes ice. She called her PR advisor instantly. She demanded clarification. She insisted the line be removed. She warned that the intro must reflect her gravitas. Gravitas. On The Tonight Show, when the producer arrived to check in with her, Meghan didn't ease into the conversation. She didn't ask. She didn't negotiate. She didn't even soften her tone. She pointed to the offensive line and said, "This cannot be said on air. Not, this is inaccurate. Not, can we adjust this? Not, I'm not comfortable with this phrasing. But, this cannot be said." The producer blinked. He tried to explain how harmless the line was. How Fallon delivered similar intros even to Academy Award winners. How audiences loved self-referential humor. But Meghan wasn't interested in context. She wanted control. She needed control. Control was her oxygen. And in that moment, she felt it slipping. "Why is this still here?" she asked sharply. "I thought everything was approved." The producer hesitated. Fatal mistake. It was, but one of the writers added it back in. Jimmy liked it. Meghan didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe. Jimmy liked it. That meant Jimmy intended to use it. That meant Meghan would be teased. That meant America would laugh. That meant she would lose control of the narrative, live. Her gaze narrowed. "This is unacceptable." Her voice was soft, but sharp enough to cut glass. "I need to speak to Jimmy." But Jimmy Fallon was already busy. Already prepping. Already rehearsing. Already unaware that a storm was brewing 10 feet away. The producer tried to soothe her. "We can adjust it," he offered gently. "We can make changes. We want you to feel comfortable." But that wasn't enough. It was too late. The damage was done. Because Meghan wasn't upset about the line. She was upset about what the line represented. A slip in the narrative. A crack in the facade. A reminder that Hollywood didn't view her as royalty, but as entertainment. Her breathing quickened. Her face flushed. Her voice tightened. And then came the moment that staff later whispered about with lowered voices. Meghan's full backstage meltdown. This wasn't screaming. This wasn't throwing things. It was something quieter. More dangerous. More telling. She spiraled. She paced the room. She muttered under her breath. She vented to her PR executive. She demanded to know why Amazon MGM allowed this. She questioned whether the show was trying to sabotage her. Her team couldn't calm her. Her advisor's reassurances only made her angrier. Her stylist tried distracting her with wardrobe adjustments. It failed. Her husband wasn't there to soothe her, worsening the anxiety. Meghan's greatest fear had surfaced. Hollywood might laugh at her, and that fear consumed her. But the real breaking point wasn't the line. It wasn't the writer. It wasn't Fallon. It was something small, something trivial, something devastating. A crew member walked by, carrying cue cards for another segment, laughing with a coworker about something entirely unrelated. Their laughter echoed down the hall, and Meghan heard it. She misinterpreted it. She assumed it was about her. She stiffened. Her eyes narrowed. Her hands clenched. That was it. The snap. The shift. The emotional cliff. She turned to her publicist and said, "I'm being mocked." Her publicist froze. "No one is mocking you. They're not talking about you. No one is even looking at you." But Meghan was beyond logic, beyond reassurance, beyond reason. Because fear doesn't respond to logic. Fear responds to imagination. Fear fills silence with worst-case scenarios. Fear rewrites reality. And in Meghan's mind, the fear became a fact. They were mocking her. They were laughing at her. They were setting her up to fail. She stepped out of the dressing room. The crew tensed. Her posture radiated tension. Her eyes burned with wounded pride. She walked fast, sharp, intentional. She hunted for the cue card writer, for the producer, for anyone responsible for the line. One staff member, terrified, stepped aside as Meghan brushed past him, eyes locked, jaw set, breath shallow. But before she could confront anyone, before she could demand changes, demand control, demand submission, Jimmy Fallon stepped out from the side hallway, and he froze when he saw her face. "Hey, Meghan," he said with his trademark enthusiasm. But her expression was unmistakable. She was furious. Fallon's smile faltered. His tone softened. His steps slowed. "Everything okay?" Meghan didn't answer right away. She looked at him as if he were the enemy. Not a host. Not a comedian. Not a collaborator. But a threat. "Finally," she said, "we need to talk about your introduction." Fallon blinked. "My introduction?" Her voice was firm. "It's not acceptable." Fallon laughed lightly, a reflex. "Oh, haha. Well, we can adjust it." He tried to keep the energy positive, light, friendly, professional. But Meghan's eyes didn't soften. They put a joke in there. A joke at my expense. Fallon's face changed. Not because he meant to mock her. Not because he believed the joke was harmful. But because he now realized the storm he was walking into. He tried to reassure her. "Oh, I joke about everyone. It's very small. It's not mean, I promise. It'll land well. I can change the tone." But Meghan didn't want tone. She didn't want nuance. She didn't want comedy. She wanted control. And the moment Fallon sensed that, he understood the interview was already in trouble. He excused himself to update the staff. He told them to remove the line. He told them to play it safe. He told them Meghan was sensitive about intros. But it was too late. Because even though Fallon removed the joke, he didn't remove the fear that had already consumed her. Meghan walked back to her dressing room, shaking slightly. Not from anger, but from humiliation that hadn't even happened yet. And in her mind, she wasn't entering a friendly interview. She was entering a battlefield. A battlefield she needed to survive. A battlefield she needed to control. A battlefield she feared she might lose. And the moment she stepped toward the stage, with the audience cheering, the floor vibrating with energy, the lights bright enough to blind, she whispered something under her breath. Something her stylist heard. Something that made her skin crawl. Something that revealed the true depth of Meghan's terror. "I can't let them laugh at me." What if one single sentence, just a handful of words on a piece of cardboard, became the trigger that unraveled Meghan Markle's entire Hollywood comeback? What if the tiny slip of paper Jimmy Fallon held in his hand, something so insignificant to everyone else in the room, was the very thing Meghan interpreted as a calculated attempt to diminish her, embarrass her, or even expose her as someone Hollywood no longer regarded with reverence? And what if that moment, that tiny moment, was not just a misunderstanding, but the spark that ignited the explosive chain of events that followed? This chapter begins the second Meghan stepped out of her dressing room. Her eyes still sharp, her breathing still shallow, her posture still tense. The Tonight Show crew could feel the energy shift as she walked down the hallway, like someone dragging a storm cloud behind them. And they were right to feel it, because Meghan wasn't simply nervous. She wasn't merely anxious. She was convinced, absolutely convinced, that someone was trying to sabotage her. But who? Jimmy? The writers? Amazon MGM? The media? Hollywood itself? In Meghan's mind, the culprit changed every 5 minutes. And yet, ironically, the cue card wasn't even meant to be an insult. It wasn't even meant to be bold. It was meant to be charming, familiar, playful, Fallon's typical style. A line he delivered to dozens of actors over the years, gently teasing their early roles as a way to make them relatable. But Meghan didn't want to be relatable. She wanted to be revered. And that's where everything fell apart. Let's rewind to the exact moment the incident detonated. A production assistant, young, nervous, eager, not knowing the tension that had already taken root, walked past Meghan carrying freshly printed cue cards. Just doing his job. He paused to double-check the stack, adjusting it in his hands. The top card read, Meghan Markle, returning to the screen after her iconic role on Suits. Harmless, right? Warm. Friendly. Acknowledging. But the line under it, the comedic tag, was the one Meghan saw earlier in her dressing room. The one that had sent her spiraling. The one that Fallon's writer had slipped in. It read, and finally proving you can go from Suits to sequels. A pun. A pun Jimmy Fallon delivers easily. A pun audiences laugh at. But Meghan didn't see a pun. She saw disrespect. She saw mockery. She saw someone reducing her journey, her sacrifices, her struggles, her reinvention, to a cheap punchline. In her mind, that single line suggested her acting career wasn't serious. Her comeback was a joke. Her role on Suits defined her. Hollywood still saw her as just Meghan the actress. And worst of all, a D-lister. The very thing she feared most. The assistant, oblivious, smiled politely as he passed her. Meghan stopped dead in her tracks. Where are you taking those? She asked. Her voice was calm, almost dangerously calm, like someone trying very hard not to explode. The assistant blinked, startled by the sudden tone. To Jimmy. He's about to. Give them to me, she said. He froze. I'm not supposed to. Give them to me, she repeated. Her tone sharpened. Colder. Sharper. Commanding. The assistant handed the stack over with trembling fingers. Meghan flipped through the cards quickly, scanning line after line until she reached the joke again. The exact phrasing she demanded be removed. The very line Fallon had agreed to cut. Her jaw clenched. Her shoulders tightened. Her face drained of color. Then she spoke the words her stylist later repeated to a colleague. They lied to me. There it was. The trigger. The betrayal. The certainty that Fallon, the writers, the producers, someone, was conspiring against her. She turned on her heel and stormed toward the stage prep area. Fallon was rehearsing. His energy upbeat. His tone light. His demeanor relaxed. He didn't see Meghan coming. He didn't see her fury, or her hurt, or the panic behind her eyes. He only heard her voice. Sharp, icy, cracking through the air. Jimmy. Fallon jumped slightly, startled. Oh, Meghan, hey. We're just about. Why is this still in the cards? Her voice wasn't loud, but it was tight, controlled, dangerous. Fallon looked at the card in her hand and frowned. That's weird. I thought we already. You said you'd remove it. I did. Or, I told them to, you know what? Let me check. He tried to laugh it off, ease the tension, smooth it out, but Meghan wasn't having it. This isn't funny, she said. Her tone dropped. Her voice quivered. Her eyes glistened with a mixture of anger and humiliation. Fallon, now genuinely confused, raised both hands in surrender. Hey, it's okay. Really, we don't have to use it. We'll toss it. Easy fix. But Meghan didn't trust easy fixes. Not tonight. Not from him. Not with everything at stake. Why was it printed again? She demanded. I don't know, Fallon said. It was a mistake. Or intentional. Fallon blinked. What? No. Why would? But she cut him off. Because this isn't a joke to me. I'm not here to be mocked. Fallon's eyebrows lifted. Gently, not mockingly, but with surprise. He looked genuinely taken aback. as though it had never occurred to him that Meghan would view the line as anything but routine late-night banter. He opened his mouth to explain, to reassure her, but Meghan turned away. She didn't want explanation. She wanted control, and she felt it slipping. Fallon tried again. "Hey, Meghan. Look, we're good. I'm on your side here. I want you to have a great segment." But she didn't stop walking. She headed straight for her dressing room, cue cards still in hand. And that's when the whispers started. Stagehands exchanged looks. Writers stopped talking. Producers held their breath. Someone muttered, "This is bad." Another whispered, "She's spiraling." A third said, "This is going to be a long night." But Meghan didn't hear any of it. She slammed the dressing room door behind her. Inside, she stared at the cards again. Not reading them, not analyzing them, just staring. Her mind raced. What if this is intentional? What if they think I'm a joke? What if this becomes a meme? What if this ruins my comeback? What if Amazon MGM sees this? Fear whispering, doubt building, insecurity spreading, paranoia blooming. She grabbed her phone, called her publicist, called her Amazon MGM liaison, called her advisor, called anyone who might give her a sense of control. Her voice trembled, her eyes watered, her breathing shortened. She wasn't angry anymore. She was terrified. What if Fallon mocks me? What if the audience laughs at me? What if the studio thinks I can't handle pressure? What if Hollywood decides I'm not worth it? Once fear starts asking questions, it doesn't stop. And then came the moment that sealed her fate. A producer knocked gently. "We need you backstage. Jimmy's about to bring you out." Meghan swallowed hard. She didn't feel ready. She didn't feel confident. She didn't feel in control. But the show waits for no one. She handed the cue cards back. "Make sure that line is gone," she whispered. "It is," the producer promised. "We triple-checked." But the damage was already done. Meghan didn't trust them. She didn't trust Fallon. She didn't trust the writers. She didn't trust the process. She didn't trust Hollywood. She didn't trust anyone. And the fear, the trembling, suffocating fear, followed her onto that stage. As she approached the curtain, Fallon's booming voice echoed through the studio. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Meghan Markle." The audience erupted in applause. But Meghan didn't hear applause. She heard danger. She heard judgment. She heard laughter, real or imagined. And it was enough to shake her to her core. Because she wasn't walking onto a late-night set. She was walking into a moment that would define the rest of her Hollywood future. And the humiliation that came next wasn't a mistake. It was inevitable. Because Meghan didn't just carry fear onto that stage. She carried the cue card incident, the moment she lost control. And that fear would cling to her every move, every smile, every breath. And it would show. But what no one expected, not Fallon, not the writers, not the audience, not Amazon MGM, was that the cameras would capture that moment of fear, and the world would see it. What if the moment Meghan Markle feared most? The moment she spent hours preparing for, stressing over, rehearsing in her mind, rewriting in her head, was the very moment she could not control? What if the humiliation that unfolded on Jimmy Fallon's stage wasn't a scripted disaster or a comedy bit gone wrong, but a raw, unscripted reaction she never planned to show the world? And what if the world didn't just watch it, but watched it again and again and again, slowed down, clipped apart, analyzed frame by millions who couldn't look away? This chapter begins at the exact second Meghan stepped through the curtain and onto the Tonight Show stage. The applause hit her like a shockwave, loud, enthusiastic, overwhelming. But applause that loud becomes distorted when your nerves are stretched thin. She didn't hear excitement. She didn't hear support. She heard noise. She heard pressure. She heard judgment wrapped in cheers. And the fear she carried from the cue card incident, the fear that Hollywood was laughing at her, didn't evaporate when the cameras turned on. It intensified. Fallon welcomed her the way he welcomed every celebrity. Big smile, open arms, exaggerated enthusiasm. But Meghan's eyes flickered with attention everyone in the front row noticed instantly. She smiled, yes, but it wasn't the relaxed, glowing smile she practiced in the mirror. It was the tight, over-polished smile of someone pretending to be fine when they were anything but. Fallon motioned for her to sit. She did. The applause faded. The cameras zoomed in. And in that moment, just seconds in, Meghan's expression flashed something the audience couldn't quite name. Not fear, not anger, not embarrassment. Something stranger. A flicker, a hesitation, a moment of what are they going to do to me? Fallon didn't see it at first, but the camera did. And the internet definitely did. Fallon dove into his monologue, greeting her warmly, thanking her for coming, making a light-hearted comment about her return to acting. It was harmless, soft, gentle, the kind of line that normally relaxes guests. But Meghan didn't relax. Her shoulders stayed stiff, her posture too upright, her eyes scanning the audience, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles paled. Fallon didn't notice the shift right away. He was doing his job, moving quickly, keeping energy high, making it fun. He jumped into the first question. So, you're back in Hollywood. How does it feel to be returning to the screen? A standard opener. A safe one. But Meghan paused. Too long. Long enough for Fallon to blink. Long enough for the audience to tilt their heads. Long enough for viewers at home to feel the discomfort slip through the screen. And then she answered. Carefully, deliberately, too rehearsed. Well, I don't see it as a return. I see it as an evolution. Fallon laughed politely, but the audience didn't, because the line didn't land like a witty remark. It landed like a correction, like a warning, like Meghan subtly saying, don't put me in the wrong category. Fallon pivoted, trying to lighten the mood. Well, we're just excited to have you back on screen again. Suits is still blowing up on streaming. Harmless, friendly, positive. But Meghan's smile tightened again. This time the camera